If World War III started today, most people would not die from bombs. They would die because they chose the wrong place to run. In a global war, survival is not about strength, wealth, or even preparation. It is about geography. It is about where you are when everything begins to collapse. Because when missiles start flying and supply chains break down, entire regions will fall apart without ever being directly attacked. Cities will run out of food. Power grids will fail. Governments will lose control. And the places that look safest on a map will often become the most dangerous. But there are a few locations on Earth where geography, isolation, and self-sufficiency combine to give you something extremely rare in World War III, a real chance to survive. And one of them is far safer than you can ever imagine. To understand where you would actually survive, you first need to understand how this kind of war works. World War III would not be slow. It would not be contained. It would spread across continents almost immediately. Missiles would cross oceans in minutes. Cyber attacks would shut down infrastructure before the first shots are even fired. And global trade would collapse faster than anyone expects. Survival in that environment comes down to three factors: distance, self-sufficiency, and strategic irrelevance. Distance keeps you away from immediate destruction. Self-sufficiency keeps you alive when the global system collapses. And strategic irrelevance keeps powerful nations from targeting or occupying your location. If a place is too close to major powers, it becomes a battlefield. If it depends on imports, it collapses. And if it has valuable resources, someone will eventually come for it. The safest places in a global war are not the strongest or the richest. They are the ones that no one needs and no one can easily reach. At first glance, the Pacific Ocean seems like the perfect place to escape. It is vast, isolated, and filled with remote islands that appear disconnected from global conflict. Places like Fiji look ideal. They are far from major military powers, surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean, and rich in natural resources like fish and farmland. But the Pacific is not empty. It is one of the most strategically important regions on Earth. Military planners divide it into zones known as island chains. These chains act as defensive barriers and control points for naval and air power. In a war between the United States and China, the most intense fighting would take place along these chains. That means large parts of the Pacific would quickly become contested. Fiji sits just outside the most dangerous zones, which gives it an advantage early in the war. It has distance, food sources, and relatively low strategic value. But if the conflict expands and those defensive lines collapse, Fiji becomes much more exposed. What seems remote at first can quickly become vulnerable as the war spreads. So, what if you go even smaller and more isolated? That leads to places like Tuvalu. With a tiny population, no military, and almost no global influence, it seems like the perfect place to disappear. In theory, irrelevance should protect it. But size alone does not guarantee safety. Tuvalu still exists within the broader strategic environment of the Pacific, and it maintains relationships with larger nations, and those connections matter in a global conflict. If control of the Pacific shifts, even the smallest islands can become important as observation points, refueling stops, or symbolic targets. There is also another problem. When you are that small, your margin for survival is limited. Resources are fewer, infrastructure is minimal, and if something goes wrong, there is nowhere else to go. Being insignificant can protect you, but it can also leave you completely exposed if the situation changes. This is where New Zealand stands out. It is not just remote, it is self-sufficient. That distinction changes everything. New Zealand is far from major conflict zones, which reduces the likelihood of direct attacks. But more importantly, it has the ability to sustain itself. Its agriculture can feed its population, its energy systems are stable, and its geographic isolation makes large-scale invasion extremely difficult. In a world where global trade collapses, these factors become critical. Countries that rely on imports will struggle to survive, but places like New Zealand can continue functioning. It is also not a high-priority target. Major powers focus on locations that provide strategic advantage. New Zealand offers very little in that regard. That does not make it completely safe, but it significantly reduces the risk. It represents one of the first places where survival becomes realistic rather than theoretical. Iceland takes this concept even further. It combines isolation with one of the most important survival advantages of all, energy independence. And most of its power comes from renewable sources like geothermal and hydroelectric energy. That means it does not rely heavily on imported fuel. In a global war where supply chains collapse, this is a massive advantage. Iceland also has access to abundant fishing resources, which supports its food supply. It has a small population, limited military involvement, and relatively low strategic importance. All of these factors reduce its risk profile. However, no place is perfect. Iceland still has connections to larger military networks, and those connections can create vulnerabilities. Even a single strategic asset can make a location a target. But compared to most of the world, Iceland remains one of the more stable and sustainable options in a global conflict. If you continue pushing further into isolation, you reach Greenland. This is where remoteness becomes extreme. Greenland is massive, sparsely populated, and largely covered in ice. It has very little infrastructure and almost no strategic value in the early stages of a war. That makes it one of the least likely places to be targeted. Its population is small, and its environment is harsh, which discourages military interest. It also has the potential for energy self-sufficiency and access to natural resources. But this is where long-term risk becomes important. Beneath the ice, Greenland holds valuable resources, including rare minerals and energy reserves. As the ice melts over time, those resources become more accessible. In a prolonged conflict, that could increase its strategic importance. What is ignored at the beginning of a war can become valuable later. Even so, in the short term, Greenland remains one of the safest locations simply because it is so difficult to reach and so hard to operate in. Now, compare all of this to Europe. Europe is one of the worst places to be in a global war. It sits directly between major powers and has historically been a central battleground. Its geography allows for rapid movement across large areas, which increases the risk of conflict spreading quickly. Modern warfare adds another layer of danger. Long-range missiles make distance within Europe almost meaningless. Even areas far from front lines can be reached easily. Infrastructure is dense, populations are concentrated, and strategic targets are everywhere. Even if you try to avoid major cities, you are still within range of military operations. There is no true safe zone. Every location carries significant risk. Europe is not just exposed, it is central to the conflict itself. Some places try to balance distance and connection. Islands like the Azores or the Canary Islands are far from mainland Europe and seem relatively safe. They have access to food, moderate climates, and manageable populations. But they also have strategic roles. They serve as logistical hubs and support points for military operations. That makes them more important than they appear. In a global conflict, any location that supports movement, communication, or supply becomes relevant. And relevance increases risk. These places are safer than mainland Europe, but they are not invisible. Their connection to larger systems prevents them from being truly isolated. The further south you go, the safer things become. In regions like Southern Africa and South America are far removed from the primary centers of global power. Countries like Chile benefit from geographic isolation, natural barriers, and limited strategic importance. Chile's long coastline and distance from major powers make it difficult to reach and even harder to justify targeting. It also has agricultural production, access to food, and relatively stable governance. These factors combine to create a lower risk environment. It is not perfect, but it is far less exposed than regions in the Northern Hemisphere. Distance from power reduces involvement, and reduced involvement increases survival chances. But here's the truth. There is no perfect place to hide. Every location has weaknesses. Every advantage comes with a trade-off. In a true global war, safety is never guaranteed. But some places offer better odds than others. The key is understanding how geography shapes conflict. Distance reduces immediate danger. Self-sufficiency ensures survival when systems collapse. And strategic irrelevance keeps you off the target list. If you can find a place that combines all three, you do not guarantee survival, but you give yourself a chance. And in a war that affects the entire world, that chance is everything. If you want to understand how geography shapes power, conflict, and survival, then you are already thinking ahead of most people. Because the difference between safety and danger is not always obvious. It is hidden in the map. And the people who understand it are the ones who are ready when everything changes. If you found this breakdown insightful, make sure to hit that like button. It helps us keep the lights on and the research moving. Share this video with someone. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. Thanks for watching.